All right, so today what we're going to do is we're going to make a rock or an asteroid, something like that. It's going to be simple, and we're going to use it to as a way to walk through the different steps in 3D code. Okay, so we're going to use it as a way to kind of explore the entire pipeline for making a real-time ready asset. Okay, so we're going to start here with voxel sculpting. When you first load up 3D code, you're going to see this. I'm just going to press Alt Enter here to go to a full screen mode. And then I'm going to go to this shader here. I'm using a matte cap shader, which is blue. I just use it to kind of help me sculpt. I find it easier to kind of read the form when using a matte cap shader here, as opposed to a PBR shader. This default shader is a PBR based shader, which means it more accurately responds to the light in the scene. There's a few different PBR shaders that you can work with. There's like metallic ones, and they're pretty solid. They're pretty nice. They're nice to sculpt with, but again, they don't do a great job of like helping you analyze and read the form as you're sculpting. But for today's purposes, I will start with this default material or shader. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of use some of these different brushes. So the base clay, I'll just mass out this form. Again, thinking I'm making a rock. I'll just kind of show you a couple of different brushes that we can use without doing like a deep dive in all the different brushes and tools. When you choose a brush for the first time, you might see like all these different options. If you want to hide that, you can just click on here, hide brush parameters, to collapse that, make it a little bit smaller. Okay. All right, so I can hold down the shift key to smooth things out. And you'll see what I'm doing. I'm left mouse dragging off my sculpt here to tumble it around, okay, to tilt around. I can pan. I'm using a stylus. I'm touching down with my stylus on the screen, which is the equivalent to left mouse click. Then I'm also pressing the stylus button, which is the equivalent of a right mouse button click. So basically left and right mouse together will give me this panning effect, allow me to pan across and move my object like so. Right mouse by itself, okay, so hovering above the screen, not touching down, but just hovering left and right allows me to zoom in, zoom out. Okay, again, this is off my mesh. I can also hold down the Alt key to force navigation. So even if my cursor is over top of my mesh and I want to just do navigation, I use the Alt key. Some of the tools that we use require this because their default action is even off the mesh. For example, the sphere tool here, it will paint, it will draw. So in order to get back into navigation mode, I will have to hold down the Alt key to enter into like just navigation mode. Okay, which will be irrespective of whether I'm over the mesh or off the mesh. Okay, just undo that. When we're over the mesh, we can hold the right mouse button. Okay, right mouse button left and right will allow me to change the size of my cursor. Right mouse button up and down will allow me to change the strength of the alpha, okay, or the strength of the effect of my cursor. So if I make it very strong like so and I sculpt, you see how that happens. Okay. All right. So we're just making, again, a simple rock. We're looking down here at the bottom here. We see the number of polys in our sculpt. So right now it's about 20,000 triangles, which is not a ton for a sculpting application. It would probably be a lot for a rock in, say, Blender or Maya. But we're going to use this to kind of help us describe the form of this thing that we're trying to create. So a couple tools that we might look at. We might look at the, there's a cutoff tool. There's a cutoff tool which I like to use, but I've kind of actually started using a different tool which is actually better. So cutoff will just basically destructively cut your mesh. So once that geometry is cut off, it's gone forever, which is neat because of 3D code you can easily cut through a mesh if you wanted to do that. That would be kind of actually cool. Maybe we'll do that actually for this. Have something with some kind of hole in it. And there's a better tool though for this. I'll just press the space bar. Oh, the space bar is not working for me. The space bar typically brings up a dialog where you can kind of choose which brush to work with. But instead I'm going to go for Vox Hide. I'm looking for something called Vox Hide. See, cut off, Vox slice, Vox hide. So it's in the same menu, just a little bit lower down. So what Vox hide allows me to do is basically I can cut away. So you think it's gone, but if I hold down Control and re-drag over the same area, it brings some of this stuff back. Okay, so it's actually all still there. It's just hidden, right? So people will use this to make more kind of like sophisticated geometry. And there's a way to hide the hidden geo, or delete anything that's hidden. We can go up to our geometry menu here and go to delete hidden. You can see I've made a hotkey for this. Because I'm a Blender user, I just use X, which is the delete key in Blender. So I just use X. So basically now if I hold down Control and drag over top, you see it's not bringing anything back because now it's like officially gone. It's deleted. Okay, so let's kind of work with this a little bit. We can kind of make something kind of interesting. And once we're happy with the general kind of structure or form, we can press X to delete anything that's hidden. Okay, so I have a mesh that's kind of complex here. A couple of the tools that I also like to use. I like to use the pinch tool. So that's under surface tools here. So while in voxel sculpting mode, and we'll talk about that in a moment, there's two different kind of sculpt modes in 3D Coat. The unique mode, the most interesting and unique mode, is the voxel sculpting mode, because it's not like any other sculpting application in the sense that it's effectively a 3D cloud of pixels that we can kind of like grow and shrink, and it basically dynamically remeshes those. It allows us to cut through our mesh really easily like I have here. It allows us to do really quick, easy Boolean operations, adding, subtracting, and unions. And effectively it just opens up a whole different approach to sculpting that's not doesn't exist really in other applications, or not as easily. So anyways, while in voxel mode, we still can do some surface mode sculpt operations. So we can access some surface mode brushes, and these more so, instead of working on the voxel cloud of pixels, they basically work directly on the surface mesh. Okay, so basically I'm going to use here the pinch tools. So I'm going to get a pinch tool. So I really like this pinch tool. It allows me to do a lot of really interesting things. So if I just kind of work with the pinch tool, you'll see it drives into the mesh depending on the height that I have here, and also pinches it together. I can choose how much pinch it has in the pinch degree. In my tool options, my pinch degree, I can increase that. So if I really want it to pinch together, I can do that. I can flatten out the brush curve, so it kind of keeps everything on the level and just pinches it in place, right? Rather than driving in and out of the mesh. So I can get some really nice clean edges and shapes like so. Okay. It is stretching out my polygons. I can press the W key and you can kind of see the wireframe of what's happening with the polygons underneath. Because we're in voxel mode, it is ultimately, we do want to get back into a voxelized version of this sculpt. So any changes we make here in with the surface mode brushes, they are temporary. So we basically, not temporary in the sense that I should say the mesh changes are temporary. This will ultimately get remeshed. So if you use ZBrush, kind of like a Dynamesh, it'll kind of dynamically get remeshed once I start going back to my voxel tools. So if I, for example, go to my move tool, and I have a hotkey for that right here, move tool. By the way, to set hotkeys in 3D Coat, you want to hover over a tool and press End, E-N-D, on your keyboard, and that will prompt the key combo that you want to use for that hotkey. So in my case, I've just used M for move. And so as you see, I can move, and I have some move options. So one is voxelize immediately, and one is topological move. So topological move will basically only move based on what is the connected geometry. Voxelize immediately will, as you can see how this is stretched. I'll turn voxelize immediately off. You see if I stretch it, see how it's going to stretch out those polygons? So it's actually stretching the geo, the mesh. So this is like a surface mode kind of operation. So you get this poly stretching. This is more like what you'd expect in a program like ZBrush or Blender if you're sculpting. Of course, in those programs you can do a remesh. So in ZBrush you have Dynamesh. In Blender you have a quadrify or quad redraw. I can't remember what it's called. But anyways, I'm going to go here to voxelize immediately, and now if I move, you'll see it remeshes it. I'll just back up. I'll press W here so you can kind of see how it's a fairly uniform triangulated mesh. See how when I make a move it recalculates it. So that's basically how voxel sculpts work. Okay, so this is what I have. I'm just going to kind of refine the form. And then ultimately we're probably going to want more detail. Okay, so you can see this is pretty faceted. It's not looking great as a sculpt at this moment. So I'm going to scroll all the way down in my tools here, and there's a couple of options, 3 options here that I really use a lot. In particular, resample and smooth all. I've set, hotkeys for these. So for resample, I set a hotkey for Control-Shift-R. And just as a reminder, you can hover over a field, press the end key, and then define the key command that you want to use for that hotkey. Okay, so Control-Shift-R for resample, and then for smooth all, I use Control-Shift-S. So I'll show you how I work with this. So and also Res Plus, I use that to increase the resolution of my mesh. So basically to subdivide it. So if I press Control Plus, which I've mapped to Res Plus, you'll see it increases the resolution. And I press W here, you can kind of see the underlying topology. If I press Control Plus again a couple times, you see how much denser it gets. It starts to smooth out some of these forms that were problematic. Okay, so we have something that's a little cleaner, but it also kind of smooths everything out. Okay, with resample, it allows us to kind of target a higher or lower density mesh quicker, right? I like to use resample to kind of sample lower usually. So I'll use resample and I'll sample low, maybe to the single digit thousands, and then I'll get a pretty low res mesh. And then if I use smooth all, which is my other option here, smooth all, the first time I run it, it's going to prompt me to, if I want to skip this dialog next time, and I click that on so that I can spam press this button. So I use this to get really nice clean forms. Once I have a shape or form that I like, then I'll press Control Plus to step higher in the resolution, to subdivide until I have something that is a lot denser, right? Let's back up here a little bit. Control Z to back up. Okay, so this is prior to my resample low. If I were to resample high, or sorry, to res plus this, to go higher again, and then I press smooth all, Control Shift S, you see how now it's not like turning into a giant blob. It's basically turning the mesh, it's just kind of gradually reducing the edges here. And hold on one second. All right, so back here. So what we're going to do next is we're going to start kind of tightening up some of these forms. So I'm going to go in and I can use another tool. I'll use the flatten tool. And this one sometimes needs a little bit of tweaking. So out of the box, it doesn't always work great, but I found that you can play with the settings. So in here, you can sometimes play with those settings and kind of get something a little bit better. If you have issues, you can let me know, and I'll do my best to kind of share the settings that I have so that you can kind of work from there. You can see the resolution here is still a little on the low side. I could probably afford to go much higher at this point. So let's Control Plus a few times. which is the hotkey that I've used. I'll go up to like say 2 million polygons or more. This is up to 5 million, so quite a high poly sculpt. You don't have to go quite that high, but I'd say at least 1 million is where you would like to get to. Okay. And for a long time I was trying to use like trim dynamic or something like that. There's like different tools, not trim dynamic, trim adaptive, things like that. But I tried flatten and I was like, well, this is actually pretty solid. This is very good. Because I thought this was a weakness of the tool for a while, but this is actually pretty effective. All right, and there's a lot more different tools that we can work with. I'll go back to my pinch tool. I have a hotkey for that. I use P for pinch, and we can kind of just sharpen up some of these edges and forms. And as you can see, the shader that I'm using is starting to get in the way just a little bit in terms of reading the detail. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I like to use a matte cap shader, because I can get a better sense of kind of what's going on. Oops. Okay, so all I'm doing is just kind of going over this and trying to get it looking a little bit more rock-like or something. The pinch tool again is really powerful. So not only can I adjust the pinch degree, I can make that lower, and then I can also use the right mouse to drag up and down, right, to kind of adjust the strength. Okay, and then I can actually also drive in to the surface simultaneously. Okay, so I can kind of get like these kinds of structures and forms, and if I hold down the control key, it will drive it outwards, so I can get raised areas as well. So this is pretty fast and effective, I find, to kind of get structural details going on. Now, one of the things that you need to be mindful of when sculpting is the higher your poly count, the harder it is to do things like smooth. So smooth starts to become a little bit more, starts to get a little slower. We can try a few tricks. So we can go to geometry here. We can turn on accurate smoothing. Sometimes that helps. But yeah, in general, it's good to get the form first. So kind of try to nail down your forms as much as possible first, and then kind of work on detail when you move to a higher poly count. So what my workflow is typically, I will stay at a fairly low poly count for as long as possible, maybe sub 50,000 triangles. So 10 to 50,000 triangles, get the shape using smooth all, resample, use my pinch tools, etc. Once I'm really kind of clear and solid on the shape, the general shape, I don't really want to change it, then I'll start stepping up to a higher triangle count. So say 100,000, 200, 500,000, etc., up to even 1 million or something like that. So yeah, I kind of have some arbitrary numbers in my mind that I kind of resample to, that I have found worked. So basically, if I want to use smooth all and really make drastic changes to the form, I want to be sub 20,000, so less than 20,000, maybe even around 10,000 or less than 10,000, between 2 and 10,000. Is good for like making kind of big changes, wholesale changes to the overall form, getting rid of like lumps, divots, bumps, etc. And all that. So I'm going to go here now to an orthographic view. So I can toggle in and out of orthographic view by pressing 5 on my numpad, or I can go up top here and there's a little cube that I can toggle, and that'll switch back and forth. If I want to go to a front view, I can go to 2 on my numpad, 4 on my numpad will do side, 6 on the numpad will do other side, 8 will do back, 7 will do top, 1 will do bottom. Okay, so I'm just going to go to a Okay, so I'm just gonna go to our front view, and I noticed there's some kind of gimbal lock that just happened there. It was kind of weird. Anyways, I'm gonna go to my cutoff tool. I'm gonna change my brush mode. So we also have this thing called the E panel, where we have different brushing styles. You'll see there's different brush stroke options, and then there's different marquee selection options. I encourage you to kind of explore this. Some brush types, like cutoff, are marquee only. If I were to do Vox hide, we would have the marquee and the brush type. So we can actually use Vox hide, for example, here. If I were to carve away, hold down Control. Oh, sorry, it's already subtractive. So I could just kind of carve away like so, and then I could hold down Control, and it'll bring stuff back, which is kind of interesting. So if you want to get some cracks and divots and things like that in that way. And let's, I'm using this brush. Let's use this one. This is like, it keeps the size the same, and it just adjusts, modulates the depth. And it looks like right now my pressure sensitivity is actually not even working. Let me confirm that. Oh no, it's working. It is working. There are options on these other brushes though. So I can use this, and there's an option here, act as Vox hide, which is kind of cool. So I can actually use this as a Vox hide brush. So it will itself hide geo, and then I can hold down Control to unhide. So you can kind of get some really, really nice kind of cracks and edge effects in this way. Okay, using Vox hide and all that. I'm going to adjust my spacing, make it a little tighter spacing, so that when I do this, it's not I don't want to see the individual alphas of each of those brush strokes. I want it to be something a little more continuous. Okay, and again, just holding down Control to paint this back in. We will want to ultimately delete the hidden geometry. So again, I have mapped that to a hotkey X, but you can go to geometry, delete hidden. Okay, now when I hold down Control and paint over it, it's not coming back. All right. And just smooth all of this out. And again, just hold down Control and bring some of it back. Okay. All right. So next, I'm going to just again press X. I'll just delete any hidden geometry. And again, that's a hotkey that I've given myself. If you haven't defined that hotkey, you're going to want to go up to this option. You can also press end in these option menus. Just hover over anything here, press end, and then choose the hotkey that you want to use. All right, so let's say this is our mesh. We're happy with this. I was going to kind of go to a front view and cut off the bottom, but I did put those extra details on there that I kind of like, so let's keep this more asteroid style. And actually, this is kind of fun to hide and reveal. It's nice to get some nice cracks in that way. And we can also change our brush alpha. So I could press T to get a different brush alpha. So I can use something with a little bit more, noise. I have to use current alpha, and that will change my alpha to match whatever brush I'm working with. And that is actually a way, way better effect for my asteroid here. Okay, so some of the things that I'm benefiting from is the poly count. So I'm at about 5 million polys for this sculpt. And yeah, and I found a brush that works pretty well. Okay, and remember, I'm using Act as Vox Hide for this base clay, and I'm also using Use Current Alpha. Okay, and I've pressed the T key to bring up my alpha options, and I've chosen an alpha with different noise. You can import your own alphas as well. So if you want like wrinkles and different things like that, that's one way to do it. But yeah. All right, so we're pretty much at a point where we can say I'm happy with this, and maybe we want to start start the process of getting some bakes. So I like to bake in 3D Coat. I like to bake before I do Retopo, because this is going to be like the highest quality version of my mesh. So when I say bake, I want to bake the ambient occlusion. So I want an ambient occlusion based on this sculpt, okay? Rather than having some ambient occlusion map based on my lower poly Retopo mesh, I want to make sure that the ambient occlusion bake is coming from my sculpt mesh. So I want to make sure that I have this. Okay, and I can add some further noise, so I can add some more global noise before I do any baking. Actually, I'll just do a little bit more. So to do that, I'm going to switch from voxel mode over to surface mode. So we do have this surface mode that we can switch into as well. So this V, I'll press on it, and we switch to surface mode. So now we're basically directly manipulating the surface. So we do have to worry about things like polygon stretching, but we do have a more robust set of kind of like sculpting options. This is more so for finalizing your mesh. So like once you kind of locked in the primary forms and things like that, and you're kind of maybe locked in your secondary forms, and you want to start going in and getting those like final tertiary details and things like that, you'd kind of move into your surface mode, right? So not only do you have these surface mode options, you also have a few extra tools down here, such as there should be a noise option. Noise. So if I go for noise, I can apply real time. So what this does, it basically applies noise to my mesh. I can mask this as well. So let's change the displacement degree. So this is the amount it displaces the mesh. So we can change this to a small number, say 0.1. Oh, my numpad I don't think is working. Let's see. Oh. For some reason for some reason the numbers are going in, but it's not updating my it's not updating in real time. The characteristic size here, I'm going to make this bigger. We'll make this, let's say 5. This is like the overall density of the effect, and I'll make this also much smaller. I'll make it 0.05. See what that does. Oof. Because I can't see the number I'm actually putting in, I'm kind of guessing. Control A, delete, 0.005. And I feel like I might have made a mistake. So what I think I did wrong, and I don't know if this is the problem. Let me just unapply that. Okay. Hopefully I can back up from this. I don't know if I deleted the hidden geometry or not. And I probably should have done this before I moved over. I think I did do it actually. Anyways, I think for whatever reason, this is giving me some funky results, this noise. So I think that I'll hold off from using that for now. I'll just kind of live with these results. Maybe I'll go into the see if there's like an airbrush tool. Let's see. No, these are painting tools. I don't truthfully use these tools that much. Let's say, let's get a draw tool. Let's get clay and change the alpha to something with a little bit more noise. And just hold down control and kind of go over it a little bit. Let's go into our brush parameters. Let's add on some miscellaneous settings. Use jitter. We can jitter the position, the rotation, vary the radius, vary the depth, things like that. So we'll get like more of a kind of like a randomized effect on our brush. So it won't be quite so uniform. Okay, so we can kind of get some like extra tertiary details going on in here. Okay, and because we're in surface mode, we've lost the ability to kind of use as Vox hide. So Vox hide is like a voxel sculpt specific mode. There are some other advantages to being in surface mode, but we'll discuss that in a later video. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's say we have something like this. And now let's say we're pretty happy with this and we want to bring this over and generate some bakes. So I'm going to shift and change my shader. As you can see, I've set a hotkey for my shader menu so that I can just bring it up. What's nice about it, it brings it right underneath my cursor. To set that hotkey, I went into Windows, Panels, and I went to Shaders, and I set a hotkey Shift Space. All right, so I'm going to go over now to Painting. Okay, and in my Paint menu, I have this separate dialog here for different layers. So these are the different layers that I'm working with. These are kind of like Photoshop layers. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go Edit, and I want to go to Calculate Occlusion. Okay, and this is going to generate an occlusion map. We can change the light count, which will affect the quality. This could take a long time depending on how high poly your Sculpt mesh is. My computer is pretty solid, so it should go fairly fast. But if I had, say, 100 million polygons, 100 million triangles for my Sculpt or more, obviously this would take a long time. That being said, having a good ambient occlusion bake, having a really good curvature bake, it's worth waiting for it, especially if you're making like a really high quality asset. You make it once and you always have it, and then you can kind of just leverage that as you do your texture painting and things like that. Okay, so this is going to kind of keep going. Should be done soon. Okay, and you'll see what it did. It darkens the areas that are kind of concave. So it looks for those crevices and it darkens the inside a little bit. And what I'm also going to do now, I'm going to bake a curvature map. Again, you can adjust the light counts. You can go really high, but it's just going to take longer the more lights you have. So I try to like not use the lowest value, but not too high. Again, if you want to get higher quality results, you could crank those values a little higher and wait longer, or you can always do your bakes outside. So Marmoset tool bag is really good for baking. Substance Painter is also good for baking. I think the gold standard is probably Marmoset tool bag for that kind of stuff. So you could always export your meshes to a tool like that, generate your bakes, and bring them back in. Okay, so this is the curvature map that was generated. Again, this is going to be hidden. The lighter areas are going to be the areas that 3D Coat describes this mesh as pointed out. The bluer, darker areas are going to be this areas that are described as pointed in. This is a RGB curvature map. There are ways to tweak it. I haven't really messed around with it, if I'm being honest. But I do believe you can kind of adjust it to the degree. You can adjust the fall off of the curvature. So like you make that tighter or wider or whatever. So it is dynamic from my understanding. I'll have to look into how exactly to work with that. Okay, so now that we have this, we generally keep our cavity map there hidden. And now I can start adding some materials. So I'll make a new layer here under layer 0. So this ambient occlusion map, it's a multiplicative map. So it's basically a multiply layer on top of anything else. So we can use it if we want. It just basically will darken the cavities and the crevices. You can use it in addition to anything else. So right now, just to note, I haven't retopologized this or anything like that. I haven't done any normal map baking yet from a high poly sculpt to a low poly sculpt. That hasn't happened. Or from a high poly sculpt to a low poly retopo mesh. That hasn't happened yet. But what I am able to do is I am still able to, in 3D Coat, do some PBR based texture painting even on my sculpt. Okay, so we can do something like this in ZBrush using poly paint or vertex paint. So it basically paints on the vertices. So the more dense your sculpt mesh is, you can kind of paint on each vert and kind of get like really nice looking stuff. But to my understanding, at least last I've used it, it's not PBR based. So it's not, you can't get like proper metalness, roughness, etc. Whereas in 3D Coat you can. So in the painting context, in the painting area here, we have these smart materials. I've given myself a hotkey for that as well. Control spacebar is what I've set. Windows, panels, smart materials. So as opposed to shaders, smart materials, control space, shift space for shaders is what I've set. Control space is what I've set for smart materials. So here, now what I can do is I can choose a base material. I could make and import my own. I could construct a new shader or a material here, but I just typically kind of have worked for the most part with what's already here. There's some stone materials, and I guess I've tweaked this one. We do have this material preview. So when we choose one of these are called smart materials, and they will basically dynamically apply materials to our objects based on things like the curvature map, the ambient occlusion map, etc. Right? So here, this is a rock material. As you can see, I have these 3 orbs up top. So there's a depth, there is a color, and then there's a roughness, metalness parameter. So this will kind of allow me to choose which of these I want to include in this material application. So I'll just set this on this layer 3. I'll call this rock base. And again, I'm not able to visualize and see the updates in real time. That's kind of annoying. Again, I think it's because I'm in full screen mode, but I do like full screen mode better, so I'll take the trade-off. I've set this material, so there's a couple, I've made a variant of this. So if I right click on that stone material and I go to Smart Material Editor, or if I go to Duplicate, and I go to the duplicate and I go to Smart Material Editor on that, It has a material that it automatically wants to set, but I can go into that material and there's this this base layer. So you can kind of picture this as multiple layers. The base layer effect. So I can turn them all off so you can kind of see. So this base layer effect, what it does, it speaks to the albedo, so the color, the depth, the roughness. I believe this is the metalness. And then we have like mask conditions or scattering conditions and things like that. But the main one we want to look at here is the opacity. So it's taking a image texture. So we've assigned it an image texture here. So if I open this up, you can see this is the image texture that's being used on this. And this little arrow, this tells us whether we use this as a replacement for whatever color we have defined here, or whether we use it to modulate whatever color we have here. So if I set it to modulate, it will take this color, in this case white, and it will mix that with this this texture I've supplied it, and then it'll also then modulate that with whatever color I've supplied here. So if I make that color lighter, you'll see that will affect how this works. So I'll just cancel out of this. I've already done something like that with this material. So if I were to just use this material, it's already set up that way. To get it denser, I've gone to this magnifying glass, and you see if I scrub to the left, the texture comes out fuzzy and not very detailed. So to increase the density, I'm just dragging from this magnifying glass to the right, and my preview will kind of show me that, okay, this is what that texture will now look like. Okay. All right. So once I'm happy with this, I can hide this preview material. I'll just put that there. And then I can right click on this material and fill, refill, or fill the entire layer. Or I could just go on my brush tools and I can just paint that material onto the mesh, like so. Okay. I could also go to my fill tool and basically bucket fill the layer as well. It's going to take a little longer. Okay, so I can kind of get something like that going as well. All right, so this is kind of like a base layer. Let's make another layer here. We can call this, say, dust. Okay, and then we can go to our, again, to our smart materials. I'm going to go for the dirt. Okay, and I can get like a dust material. And let's turn on our preview. See what that dust would do. See how it like adds like a layer of kind of dust on top there. And there's different kind of materials. Again, I can change the density of this. Okay, and I can get something maybe like that. Okay. Yeah. So let's say we do something like this, and we could even do both. Let's do this one first. Fill entire layer. Okay, so now this dust material has been applied as well, and we can add another layer. Excuse me, and we can try out like a different dust effect. Just see what we have. Okay, this one's more of like a sediment kind of has built up over time. That's kind of nice. I can put this on a layer below or above, and I can, with this, right click and fill entire layer, like so. And of course I can adjust the opacity of these effects if I want. I can adjust the metalness, the roughness. So on this dust layer, you can see it's the roughness is contributing to the gloss that we see on those black spots, those dark spots. If I didn't want that, or if I wanted less of it, I'll just show you that it's on this layer. If I wanted less of that, I could go to my roughness opacity and just dial it down. Okay, and you'll see it will be a subtler effect. It won't be quite as strong. Okay, but I do like it, so I'm going to bring it back. All right, so we have something like that. There's another kind of a material that I really like. There's also this depth opacity, which I can play with as well. Okay. So if I go to, I think it's leaks. No. Leaks is kind of cool, but it's not going to give us quite what we're looking for. This is something you would definitely want to probably modify. The leaks. But again, kind of get some interesting effects. If we wanted it, I can make this a toxic ooze or something like that. So let's make this on a new layer. Hit the plus here. Let's call this ooze. I'll dial up the density on this. That doesn't quite look right for some reason. This one looks better. So let's go with this. Let's right click on this and duplicate this. And on this one, on the duplicate, we're going to go to Smart Material Editor. And again, we'll set this color to white. Okay, and then we'll also set it to modulate. That way I can define the color here. I'll just save that. And now I can choose whatever color I want. And it will use that color instead. Okay, and again, I will just dial up the density on this thing, like so. There we go. You can press the B key. Oh, some of these hotkeys are not showing up for me. Anyways, so we can have something like this, and we could add that ooze to a layer. And you'll find we can actually apply it. So I can, whoops, right here, fill entire layer. Okay, and then where it says standard blend, if I wanted to, I could do things like use this as emissive. So I could use that as an emissive map, in which case this would export as a glowing material when I use this in a rendering engine. Okay. Sadly, 3D Coat doesn't have a post-process effect, so I can't visualize it in Engine. I have to export it first. But that is how we would define an emissive material here in this tool. We can also, of course, do things like overlay, screen, multiply. So all of the kind of effects that you might expect from say Photoshop, you could kind of do a lot of that here. Again, we can dial back the roughness and things like that, and even the opacity if we want this to be a subtler effect. There are a lot of different things that we can do. All right, so so yeah, maybe you want this to be a rock that's in water or something. It's got like algae growing on it or something like that, right? That's kind of how we might approach that. And that would make sense for a rock like this. It looks like it's been worn down by water, etc. Anyways, we can also just turn it off, right? But it's kind of neat for the story of it to have it on. Maybe I'll keep it. All right, so anyways, say we're ready to export this thing. What we want to do at this point is go to, first actually we have to retopologize it. So we do have to retopologize it. So to do that, we're going to go to Retopo, and now this is still a sculpt. This is a very dense 5 million poly sculpt. We want to make a lower poly approximation of this mesh. So I'm going to go in with my sculpt tools or my retopology tools, and I'll make this poly group is basically the name of my final object. I'll give it a name. I'll call it rock. Okay. And now I can use my retopology tools. So add split, for example. I could just click, 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 and define polygons that way. One of the things I wish I knew when I started doing retopology is that I should start with as big polygons as I can, and then I can subdivide them, make them smaller after the fact. And to that effect, I use the points to polygons tool. So points to polygons, with this tool, I can basically left click to define points, and then I can right click to fill in the polygon. Okay, so I can left click to define points and right click to define that polygon. Okay, so I can do that like so and like so. And what makes this tool really powerful, in my opinion, is I can hold down Control. There's like these different modifier options you can have. So one here is a Control tool, split rings. So you can choose what we want this to be. So we can set this to add split. So when I hold down Control, it switches to add split mode. So I can actually add in an extra polygon like so. But I like to set the Control to split rings. I have Control Shift, so there's also Control Shift modifier. I have that set to add split. So Control split rings. I can do that. And what I have learned to save myself like time is I make as big polygons as I can using points faces, and then I can kind of go in after the fact and chop it up, make it smaller. Okay, but I want to do as much of the heavy lifting as I can this way. The nice thing is the auto snaps, so you can see auto snap is checked on. We could turn that off if we want to, but by default it's set on. And when I auto snap, the auto snap will reconform the mesh to try to match the underlying sculpt. Okay, but I try to save that step till the very end, right? So that, or not, I try to kind of start with as crude of a retopo as I can initially, just to save myself from too many clicks. Okay, you can right click and drag on a point. So if I right click on a point and drag it, you see I can drag it, and you see if I drag it over top of another point, it snaps together. Like so. Oops. Okay, and there, you know, depending on what kind of model you're making, you might want to kind of go in and capture some of these smaller form details. For what we're doing, it's not necessary. We'll just rely on the normal map to do that. But if you're making more of a hero asset or a character or something like that, you might want to kind of capture more of the nuanced areas as well. Around rings like this, I try to kind of keep a edge flow, same as if I was like doing a character's eye or mouth or something like that. Try to keep like a nice loop going around it, like so. Okay. Just start connecting these up together. You definitely want to save your work from time to time. 3D Code does have a pretty solid autosave tool. And it does sometimes try to catch you. Like if it is about to crash, a lot of times it will tell you, hey, we're crashing, save your work right now, which is kind of nice. But like I said, I said this to my class earlier. It does at times give you some weird, does have some weird kind of bugs, sadly, at times. But most of the times you can work around it. There are some where it causes some problems with the with like textures. So sometimes the textures will disappear. I've run into that one. That one's not fun. But again, if you save pretty frequently, you'll be okay. Let's save file, save as. Oh, I think again this whole not being able to see my have my screen update. Let's see if I, oops, Alt Enter. Let's see if this makes a difference. File, save as. There we go. Okay. All right. So I have that saved. Again, we'll just continue retopoing this thing. And I will say, retopo is something that grows on you. First, it will feel can feel maybe tedious and like an unnecessary or a boring step, but once you get your workflow down, it's not so bad. It's actually kind of fun. It's kind of mindless. You can kind of put on some music or put on an old show or something like that and just kind of chip away at it. 3D Coat does have auto retopo tools, but it is good to kind of understand the manual tools that it has and only use the auto tools in once you already know what you're doing. All right, cool. So now I 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, so you want to count the number of loops on the one side of the hole, and on the other side, I have a feeling it's probably not going to match, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Wow, we got lucky. It matches. So we can bridge these edge loops. I believe there's a bridge edge loop tool. I don't really rely on it. Let's see. I will just do this. We're going to kind of go here, here. It's kind of an awkward area we're in. Okay. And we'll just kind of extend this out. Connect it like that. Connect it like that. Connect this like that. So again, we're using right mouse dragging to snap things together. Okay, we'll do the same on the other side. And actually, let's see. So we have 1, 2, 3 on this one. Let's just try to remember that one at the bottom is this one. So this needs to connect, have 3 spots in between. Let's go from here to here. 1, 2, 3. So go from here to here. And might as well start stitching this together. Oh, did I do this right? Let's see. Yep. Here and here. Okay. And we'll do the same thing here. We'll get this one. We'll skip one and go to there. Just snap like so. And I think all the other ones were, we just skipped one, so I should be able to just do that. And this one, just skip one, go from here to here. All right, so we'll just connect all of this. So having a hole is like a tricky thing to retopo. And there's different strategies on how you might tackle, but yeah, some parts are just awkward to work in. And it's one of them. Okay. All right. Cool. So I'm just going to hold down Control because I'm in my points to polygons tool. I'm just going to hold down Control. By the way, I was right-click dragging to move those verts and drop them onto the other pieces. You might find that you might accidentally just left-click just out of habit and create these random points. If you do that, you want to get rid of them. Hover over them and press Delete. Okay, hover over them and press Delete. They'll turn yellow. You just press Delete to get rid of them. All right. So now, whoops, so careful. See, this is not great. Like we have these edge loops that run all over the place. But around the hole, I've tried to keep it fairly concentric. It's kind of like contained, right? Which is ultimately what we want. So we can get more localized details in these spots in particular. All right, cool. So now that we have this, we can go through and I can use, there's a smooth tool or a brush tool, brush. With this, I can kind of shift geometry around if I left click. If I hold down shift, I can actually just smooth out the geo. I can smooth out that retopo mesh and it slides across the underlying sculpt. So that's kind of nice. I can kind of just smooth that all out and kind of get the form reading better. Okay, and once I've done this, then I can use my UVing tools. So I can go in and UV unwrap this thing and then go from there. All right. So what I'll probably do, I'll UV unwrap it first and then I'll subdivide it. So I'll UV unwrap it and then I will subdivide. So sorry, I won't UV unwrap it. I'll just mark out my seams first. And now, no, I can't still. I'll mark the seams. So 3D coat, really solid UV unwrapping tools. So you're going to go to your UV section here in your Retopo, under the Retopo room. Mark seams after we've mapped out our topology. If you don't have this UV preview, it's really handy. I didn't know what it did at first, but once I found out what it's doing, I was like, whoa, this is really, really amazing. So you can go to, if that's not there, you want to go to Windows, Panels, UV Preview. Windows, Panels, UV Preview. Make sure that's on. I should probably give that some kind of a hotkey just in case. Let's do end. Nah, I'll just leave it as is. I'll just open it when I need it. So UV Preview, what it does it will preview the UVs, the islands of whatever I hover over. So right now it's not giving us much to work with, just because my UVs aren't really kind of set up for it. But if I cut a seam, so I'm holding shift, it'll cut a whole edge loop if I hold shift. Or I can just left click to define a specific seam. Okay, when I see that red line, that means there's a seam. So basically, and I can hold down Control to remove a seam. Control to remove a seam. Shift to mark a whole seam. Shift and Control to remove a whole edge loop. Okay. So anyways, so we have this. So you see I hover over this, and because I haven't made any lengthwise cut, it's almost just like a tube. It doesn't give us a great unwrap. So we do want to make sure that we have this, and now we can see we have a more flat unwrap. Okay, it kind of gives us a preview too of which island or which polygon our cursor is hovering over, so we can see which corner is which and how it aligns. Okay, which is also nice and handy. Okay, so we can make a couple cuts here to just have smaller islands. You'll find, which is kind of also nice, is it only cuts up until a seam that's already cut. Okay, so if I make a cut here and a cut here, and then I hold down shift, it'll only cut the loop, the edges in between those two previously cut edges. Okay, so this is useful if you want to not cut across a whole edge loop, but you just want to cut like a certain region. I wish Blender had something like this. I can cut that, and then I hold shift in between, and it will only cut that range. Okay, so that's also really, really handy. So anyways, we want to cut this part up so it's not looking like a folded up plastic bag. We want it to be nice flat islands. Okay, so to do that, we will maybe cut here, and that generally gives us a solid result. But this is not ideal because you see the red parts on that UV preview. That means it's like very stretched, and the blue part means it's very compressed. So the more gray it is overall, the better we're gonna have of an unwrap. It's not gonna be as distorted texture-wise. Okay, so let's make another cut here, and we can see right away that it didn't cut all the way through, right? You can kind of see that seam didn't continue on. Let's undo that. Let's see. So let's say we want to cut from here across like so. So now we have that, and maybe we'll cut like this, like that. Okay, so this is a nice flat piece. This is a relatively flat piece. You're always, when you're UV unwrapping, you do want to kind of find a balance between not having too many seams, right? So that you don't have to worry about like potential visible seam issues, and having maximum UV coverage. So the challenge is, if you have like a wonky shape like this, the less seams you have, the bigger your islands will be, and the more distortion you'll potentially have. But and also because the islands are going to be weird shaped, they won't necessarily pack that well in your square UV space, right? So you might get lower than optimal kind of UV coverage. So your textile density you might not get as much bang for your buck in terms of like how much coverage you're having in your UVs. So for that reason, having smaller islands, you can pack things in more densely at the cost of having these potentially visible seams. My experience has been that seams typically, because now in these programs you can paint right directly on the mesh, the seams are not quite so apparent, so it's not that big of a deal. And sometimes it's good to prioritize UV coverage. Yeah, so I think this looks pretty good. It looks like all my islands are nice and flat, not too big. It's not great because I do have a ton of seams everywhere, but like it's not the end of the world. I should be okay. So It's not like a character's face. In a character's face or something, you kind of want to avoid having a seam run straight down the front center. That's not as good. But anyways, let's say we have this. I'm going to now unwrap this. So now I know it's not unwrapped. Once it's unwrapped, I'll know because there's going to be a checkerboard pattern applied to it. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit more and I'm looking for unwrap. I should probably set a hotkey for this because it is important. I should do that. Let's do it. And I think U is taken by something else. Oh, it's actually not. So U to unwrap. So now I can hit the U key to unwrap, and then yeah, so that's my UVs. So now the UV preview is just giving us a UV map. So I can actually go in here and I can move these around, rotate, scale, right? Again, we want to keep everything fairly gray unless we have a very specific reason for changing up the textile density. We don't ever typically want to have a situation where we have a very dense textile density some spots and a sparser textile density in other spots. And I can tell the density by how frequently that checkerboard pattern multiplies. You can almost visualize the number of pixels that are able to kind of be covered by this UV island. Okay, so much more here, much less here. So anyways, I'm going to scale that back down, put it back where it was. There are some packing tools. These are not these tools are solid for packing, but they're not like they're not crazy tools. Like there's other tools that are better for this. So I can go here to pack UV2, and what it's going to try to do, I can press it a few times. It's going to try to like rearrange and kind of pack these islands in as densely as possible. And you can hover over it for the tooltip. This so there's no rotation in UV pack 2. Let's see if pack U. Okay, so UV pack looks like it will handle rotation, so we might get a potentially denser result from that. But again, I think it's better if you kind of go in and manually and kind of define the unwrap. There are some tools that we can use. If I select an island like this, there are on the selected, I can change the unwrap algorithm. So GU, I think, is the default here in 3D Coat, which is a proprietary algorithm that they use, I believe. It's global uniform. But there's others, ABF, angle-based flattening, LSCM, least square conformational maps. To planar is like more of a planar projection map. To strip, if I have something like that's grid based, if I do to strip, it will square it out. But then you see it gives us like a nice kind of organized island, but at the cost of like distorting our UVs. Okay, so some parts get more stretched and some parts get more dense. So it's not horrible, right? But it is something to be aware of. Okay. So anyways, you can kind of go through, I don't know if it'll work on something like this. Yeah, it doesn't work. Only if it's a grid-based island will it work. Anyways, so that's that. To deselect something, you can select something here, and you can deselect it by pressing Control D, just like you would in, I think Photoshop lets you do that. Yeah, Control D in Photoshop. I think you can also hide stuff. Yeah, so there's an option here to hide. I'm going to put a hotkey on that as well, and H to hide. Oh, pick current layer. I don't want to override that. That's actually an important one, so I'll hit cancel there. Don't want to do that. So I'll just, if I needed to hide it, I will just, whoops. I can go here and hit hide. Okay, and it'll hide those islands. Okay, and I can unhide or invert hidden, unhide all. There we go. All right, so anyways, we have this. It's UV unwrapped. We're ready to bake. Okay, so we could basically bake this at this point. We have a UV unwrapped low poly mesh. We have a high poly sculpt. It already has texture paint on it, so even the texture paint will be baked down to the low poly mesh. in addition to the normal map, which is great. But we could further do texture painting on that low poly mesh after bake as well. Or we could save all our texture paint to the low poly mesh after bake if we wanted to also. I just like to do it before, especially if I have a fairly high poly sculpt mesh. Anyways, so we have all this, and the one last thing I probably want to do is I want to increase the poly count. So I think this is how many faces? 271. You compare that to 5 million, it's like pretty good. But I'll just go ahead and I'll subdivide this. Let me subdivide. Let's see. Commands. I might have to select it first. Okay, and we have these selected options. Let's look for subdivide. Oh, you know what it is? I'm in UV mode, so I do have to kind of get out of UV mode. I'll go back to just say select mode or something like that. And then I can subdivide. I don't even think it has to be selected. I do have those selected options, but I can go to entire mesh and I can hit subdivide here. Okay, and it'll just basically subdivide. That way I'll get a slightly better kind of conformity to my underlying sculpt. Okay, which is good. It's good to have. All right, so that's effectively that. I can say I'm ready. It's 1,000 polygons, which is a little bit high. You know, if this is like a simple background rock or something like that, but I did want to make it a little bit more detailed. So now I can go to bake up top here. There's an option here to bake. Let's save this incrementally. And we'll go to bake with normal map. Okay. And generally speaking, this is going to give us two bake cage, an inner cage and an outer cage. You can preview the inner shell and the outer shell here. The inner shell, we don't want the inner shell to be visible through our sculpt mesh. Okay, we generally want to make sure that none of the inner shell is poking through. So you can see that part of the inner shell is poking through. We don't want that. So what we want to do is we can change the inner depth. Can increase, right? You can increase it so that it is definitely hidden completely. Okay, and generally speaking, you do want to try to keep the bake cages as close to the sculpt mesh as possible without poking through it. But you know, you definitely don't want to have certain parts poking through. If that does happen, it's not the end of the world. You can go back and tweak these settings and rebake within the tool, but it's better to avoid it in the first place. So here's my outer mesh. Again, same thing. I want to make sure no parts of my underlying sculpt mesh are visible or poking through this outer mesh, this outer bake cage. And it looks like nothing is, so I'm good. I'll hit OK. It's going to prompt me and ask me what level of texture density do I want. I'm going to go for 4K. Just to kind of get the maximum, not maximum, obviously I could go higher than this, but 8K and 16K is like massive overkill. 4K is plenty for what I'm making. So we'll go ahead and do that. And yeah, we'll hit OK. Give it a moment. It's going to take a little while. Or maybe it'll go fast. Never mind. It went pretty fast. So now I have if I go to my paint room, I'll have, oh, it didn't work. Why didn't it work? I have to figure out what happened here. Looks like it didn't work. let's hide our sculpt mesh. Yeah, that's our low poly. I did not receive anything. Huh. Okay, this is good because we can troubleshoot this. I'm going to go into this default, and I'm just going to click the X. I'm going to delete that surface mesh. So this is important to be mindful of. This is it was a separate mesh from our Retopo mesh. So our Retopo mesh is still here in our Retopo space. When I bake, it creates a duplicate of this, puts it in the baking space. Oh, I think I know why it's not working. So there is an option here in 3D Coat under Retopo, under Bake. So you see this checkbox, name correspondence for baking. This should be off for you guys so you don't have to worry about it. But name correspondence for baking can be useful, where what it'll do, say you have like multiple sculpt objects and multiple Retopo objects, right? So you have a character with a body, arm, leg, whatever. It's a robot character, and you want to have a separate bake for each element. If there's a name correspondence between the Retopo object, so if this is called rock and this is called rock, and then I have another layer called, I don't know, staff or something like that, and then another layer here called staff, it will only bake from this to this, right? But this is called volume 1, this is called rock, so it just didn't know what to do. So this is based on a previous setting that I've had on a previous project. So I can uncheck name correspondence for bake, and it'll just ignore the names, and it'll just bake from what's visible. So in this case, this visible mesh, this sculpt mesh, to this visible, or to this UV rock, okay? UV unwrapped rock asset, I should say. So now if we do bake, let me just save this. Save. So if we do that again, we'll just go bake with normal map, okay, and use the previous settings, okay, just hit okay. It should take a little longer this time. We'll go back to a 4K map. I was surprised by the fact that it went so quickly. So wait a moment. I'm just waiting. And I did go kind of fast here, but I'm looking at this UV island and there's a lot of wasted space. Like ideally I would have gone in there and like packed this in more densely. But yeah, we could always come back and do that if we wanted to, but we didn't. All right, so we'll go over now to painting. And we'll hide our voxel sculpt. Okay, and we're left with our Retopo sculpt. So this is our Retopo object. Okay, I can press W here. We can see the wireframe, and you can see how the textures have been applied. So it's a 4K map. I could go in, like I said, into the layers. So into the layers here, I can make a new layer. And I could do further texture painting directly onto my low poly sculpt or Retopo mesh. I'll give it a name. So where it says surface materials or painting objects, we'll go. Oh, it has the name rock already, so we're good. But yeah, we could go into this. Let's get rid of our smart material. Oh, it's gonna crash on me. No. Okay, so now it's trying to use the fill tool. So I'm using the fill tool. I can use albedo color tolerance, and I can reduce that if I want. And I can kind of go in on a new layer, and I can just fill different areas like so. Okay, I can adjust the albedo tolerance. Okay, and we can change things like on this layer. We could change the blend style, so we could make it color dodge We could make it multiply. We can dial down the depth opacity. We could dial down the roughness opacity. Okay, we could of course dial down the overall opacity. So I'm just doing this to show that we can texture paint on the directly on the actual model, the 3D low poly model. And the cool thing is all of the texture paint that I did on the Sculpt is still live and dynamic. It's like linked to both. So I can still turn it on and off, right? It's baked, but I still have my layer structure intact, which is really, really amazing. So any Sculpt painting I did before, it's still present, and I can still work with it here on my lower poly retopoed mesh. And instead of doing vertex painting, where I'm painting directly on the vertices of the Sculpt, I'm now painting onto a texture map, as you can see down here. In the texture editor, you can see the different maps. So this is our color view. You can see our normal map view. We can see our roughness view. We can see our metalness view. Okay. And yeah, it is pretty useful. There's a couple other things that we can be aware of. So I can go in here up top. You'll see it says always, and we still have these guys. So I can turn some of these off. So let's turn off both the depth and the glossiness and just leave color. And I'll change my color to something maybe a little bit like that. And I'll make another new layer here. And instead of setting this is paint mode to always, I can set this to something like more on convex. Okay, when I set that to more on convex, I can preview this. Let's see. Okay, I'm not really seeing much of a difference, but let's paint fill it. Huh. Why is it not working? See the cavity map. Okay. So it looks like, I wonder if the cavity map didn't work. I wonder if the cavity map didn't translate over. Because I'm no longer seeing the cavity map, which is strange. So I'm gonna try deleting that cavity map and making a new one. So I can always make a new one. I can go edit, calculate curvature. Should go a little faster now because I'm not doing it on a super high poly Sculpt. I'm doing it on the retopoed mesh. But typically in my past experience, this hasn't been the case where I no longer where the cavity map is no longer visible. I don't know what happened there. But let's see if this does the trick. But what I have found in the past is that generating a cavity map based on a retopo mesh in 3D Coat, it doesn't give us as good of a result. Because typically when we bake our cavity map, we do want it to be from our highest kind of poly Sculpt. All right, so now we have a new cavity map. We'll just look at it, see, it looks pretty good. Sometimes if we have a low poly mesh, it'll kind of get these edges and the facets, it'll cause problems. But I think it reads the normal map, and I think by virtue of us having that normal map, it kind of does an okay job. Okay, so let's turn that off. And now here we'll do this more on convex. So we'll again try to just visualize what this should look like. It's still not really giving us, oh there it is, that's kind of what I expected to see. So you see it looks for the pointed out areas more. And now see up on the convex, this is where I guess I have access to the RGB channels of my cavity map. So we can change our cavity width to make it tighter, right? We can adjust the degree so it's less or more. We can change the contrast to make it like a tighter fall off or a more gradual fall off, etc. Okay, so we have a lot of control here. So I could kind of go in here. I could fill the layer. Okay, yes. I'll call this edge wear. And from there, I could even do further things. I could go in and I can change again. Is this a screen effect? You know, how much opacity am I using to change how subtle it is? Or is it more of a multiplicative effect? So I don't want to make those edges darker for some reason. Maybe, but probably not. So anyways, a lot that you can kind of play with to see what kind of results you can get. Okay, and we're still really just scratching the surface, right? There's a lot more that we can do, but this kind of gives you an understanding of the basics. The E panel is also here, so if we go into our brush tools, we can paint with different brushes, you know, or different marquee selections and things like that. So if we make another new layer, turn this off, turn this to always, right? Then we can kind of like paint like so onto our mesh. Whoops, and I crashed it. It is gonna let me save. It's catching me, so let's hit yes. And call it asteroid 002. File open. All right, so there we are. Okay, so I'm gonna just go through that last step. I'm gonna export this and show you what we can do with it after that. Let me delete that layer. Okay, so let's say this is our model. File, let's go File, Export Object and Textures. Asteroid export. Let's go for Blender. Asteroid. And let's change this to Blender. Blender cycles. Sure. Okay. Displacement emissive. We don't need that. Displacement. Okay. Could be this. It could be the Z up coordinate system. Interesting. Huh. Okay, and if you are a technical artist, this is your job. It's figuring out how to export from one tool to another tool. Figuring out what your pipeline is and kind of mapping out your kind of presets and everything like that. Okay. All right. Let us see what this gives us. Let's go to Blender. Okay, and file, open. Let's go Blender. Oops. File, import. I believe I chose FBX. And go up. Blender, asteroid, import. Okay. So when you bring stuff from 3D Coat into Blender, a lot of times it's like gigantic. Something to be aware of. The metalness, everything got rotated in a weird way. Let's go to shader editor. Let's see. So it's got the normal map. Metallic is cranked for some reason. It shouldn't be. File, save. Asteroid. Save as. File. Export. File, export. GLB. Asteroid, include. Let's see. Why is this so big? Selected objects. I don't want animation. Shouldn't have any. Shouldn't have any shape keys. Skinning. Mesh, UVs, normals. I can make a WebP instead. Materials, export, images, automatic. Okay. But we have an asset that is game ready. Here we are. Kind of to jump through some hoops to get here, but it definitely kind of is worth the effort, especially once you kind of figure out your pipeline and you kind of have your process down. It's fairly kind of straightforward to kind of repeat that process. All right, guys. So we'll wrap up here, and hopefully this has been informative. I will continue with more of these kind of videos to break down some of the pipeline and process, in particular using 3D Coat, in a sculpting context and game asset preparation context. But yeah, I will talk to you guys next time. All right, take care. Bye.